We're back now with our politics panel. Amy Walter is national editor of the Cook Political Report. John Heilemann is managing editor of Bloomberg Politics. Jamelle Bouie is chief political correspondent for Slate magazine and a CBS News political analyst. And Mark Leibovich is a chief national correspondent at the New York Times magazine and also a CBS News contributor. John Heilemann, what's going on in the race right now?
What is going on?
Well, it's almost over, John. The blessed day is nearly upon us. What's going on is I think that the race is tight and tighter than I think a lot of people thought it would be at the end, but it's still the case that Hillary Clinton has never been behind in this race, not for one day since the general election started. And although her lead is small, it's the case that people in the Clinton campaign feel more confident about where they are than those who were with the Obama campaign in 2012 felt at this same stage in 2012. They feel like she has a narrow but durable lead and a lot of paths to 270 electoral votes, and that Donald Trump is behind and has very, very few paths to 270 electoral votes. And so they are feeling not ebullience and not overconfident, but quite confident that they are going to end up winning on Tuesday.
Amy, what do you make of the Donald Trump schedule change? So was supposed to be in Wisconsin yesterday, canceled now in Michigan and in Minnesota. Is that a crazy last-minute genius, or is it a sign of spreading himself too thin? How do you read it?
Well, two things. Going to John's point about feeling like 2012, I feel like we are in a deja vu moment here. We've gone into the time machine. We've gone back to 2012. We're talking about the exact same things today that we were at this point in 2012. Back then, it was, can Mitt Romney win a national election really by just driving up vote among white voters and not growing the base? So we're litigating that yet again. We also said, can Mitt Romney tip one of these Rust Belt states that's been in Democratic hands for years and years and years at the very last minute, despite putting no effort, no on the ground work there? In 2012, it was Pennsylvania. This year, it's Michigan. So we know what the answer was in 2012, but this is, it looks very familiar, and it looks like we're heading down that same path in 2016. I think that your point that you raised to Reince Priebus was the right question, which is it makes perfect sense that a state like Michigan and Pennsylvania would be in Donald Trump's target list. These are the kind of states where if you're going to win with white working class voters only, those are the kind of places you go. But those are the places that you would also invest early by finding those voters, registering voters, getting those voters out, not going in with 48 hours to go.
Jamelle, Mitt Romney got 59% of the white vote, didn't win. Ronald Reagan got 54% of the white vote, did win because it was a bigger part of the vote. So this goes to Amy's, this was the argument at the beginning of this race. How do you think this race itself, Mitt Romney was a different candidate than Donald Trump. Donald Trump has a better chance of turning out more of those working class white voters. So how do you think this theory plays out? Where's it playing out? Is Donald Trump, is he proving a lot of the skeptics wrong?
I don't think he is. I mean, he's undoubtedly turning out more working class white voters than before, and I think that explains the fact that he is not far behind in very many swing states. Working class white voters, such a large proportion of the electorate, that doing extraordinarily well with them, or very well with them, kind of lifts your ceiling considerably. But what it's taken Trump to get all those voters out has also repelled college-educated white voters. And Hillary Clinton is on pace to win college-educated white voters for Democrat for the first time since we've been keeping track of this. And on the same token, what it takes to bring out all those working-class white voters also drives Hispanic and African-American voters to the polls. And we're seeing anecdotal evidence, at least, that Hispanic voters are turning out at a huge level. And so, you know, the idea that there is some pool of working class whites that you could turn out and maybe make up the deficit that Romney had, I don't think that's wrong. I think what people didn't consider was the extent to which actions have reactions, and that the things you would need to do to turn those voters out alienate so many more.
Right. Well, how do you see things here at the end, Mark?
Well, I also think before you look too deeply into what Donald Trump's travel schedule has been the last few days, you have to wonder how sophisticated their polling operation has been at all, or if they've done any polling. I mean, forget whatever commitments they have on the ground. I mean, apparently, it's unclear who his pollster is now. I guess he didn't pay There was a whole backstory about whether he actually had any infrastructure at all. You always, as Amy said, you always have to be aware of the 11th hour sleeper states. All of a sudden, Minnesota, Michigan are the states we're talking about now. Again, Pennsylvania, Mitt Romney, John McCain. Remember, George W. Bush was supposedly really close in California in 2000. It nearly cost him the election. So there's that. And also, people are always looking probably too deeply into signs of momentum, crowd, that kind of thing. Look, people are engaged. This is the 11th hour. You would hope people are engaged. And look, we just don't know very much now. We'll know a lot more in 36 hours.
John, Mark brings up a good point. The RNC did put a lot of effort on the ground the minute that after 2012 ended. Right. But the RNC is not Donald Trump. And how in sync they are will be one of the stories of this election. But if this election has also been about the smarty pants elites versus real human beings.
You're not talking about anybody at this table, right?
No, yes, present company included
Good, okay.
twice. But if one of the challenges of this election is the smart people think they know what's going on, and then Donald Trump has been extremely successful doing his thing. Is that going to be the story about sort of the old-fashioned question of the science of politics and turning people out and analytics and all these things you hear that are supposed to make politics like a science? Maybe Donald Trump just knows something better.
Well, if that's true, a lot of us are going to have to really check a lot of our preconceptions at the door. Here's where I don't think it's going to be true, and it's, again, one of the most important things to think about what's going on right now. It plays into the question of Michigan and everything else. We have an election day on Tuesday. In some states, like Michigan, election day is election day. Everybody votes on election day. Part of the reason why Michigan is now, quote, in play, and why both the Clinton campaign and the Trump campaign are there is because there is no early vote in Michigan. So to the extent that there's been momentum, tightening, it could play out in Michigan. If Trump really has momentum, he could win on election day. In a lot of these other states, they've been voting for weeks or many weeks or many days, right? And that is where the question of science, where money, where infrastructure, where get out the vote operations, where ground game really matters. So, part of the reason the Clinton campaign is confident that the tightening that we've seen in this past week, though real, will not have a huge effect is that in places like Florida, North Carolina, Nevada, other places like that, they have already banked a huge number of votes and have, in many cases, they believe, and there's some actual statistical, not anecdotal evidence to suggest it's true, they bank so much vote that no matter how well Donald Trump does on election day, it won't be enough to make up that gap.
Right.
And they're still voting today
Yes.
in big states, Ohio, North Carolina,
Florida.
Florida. So this is still, people are voting today. Even as we take all these polls,
Right.
we're going to see a big number coming out of Ohio, I think, and that's why that's the other interesting thing when we look at what this path to 270, and John's right about the many opportunities for Hillary Clinton. Trump has narrower path. If she takes Ohio off the map, if she wins Ohio, which right now it's a point, the Columbus Dispatch had her up a point, your poll has her down a point. This is where the ground effort matters. This is who turns out today matters. If that gets off the map, then all this discussion about Michigan and Minnesota is done.
But it's three of them, just quickly, right? If she takes off the table Florida,
Correct.
or North Carolina, or Ohio,
Right.
the election is basically over.
Because of the traditional
But we've been
states
putting
vote for
Ohio in
Democrats.
that Republican
And
camp.
it's worth saying that Sunday is a very important early voting day for
Yep.
African American
Yep.
voters.
Yes,
Right? So
Yep.
North
huge.
Carolina and Ohio and Florida,
Yep.
souls to the polls today could make a significant difference in the final outcome.
What's the situation with the African American vote? Hillary Clinton's had these concerts. It's clearly a last-minute push. Is that a push out of desperation, or is that, as you say, souls to the polls is the thing that happens on a Sunday? Right. So is it happening where? Just give us a sense of where you think it is.
I think it's a couple things happening right now. The first is that there is a reduction in enthusiasm from 2012. I think that's been portrayed as a collapse in enthusiasm, but it looks more like a reversion to the mean, basically. That you had 2008 and 2012, and when African American voters were voting above and beyond white voters, now they're voting a lot like white voters, which for Democrats is not the greatest situation because pretty much any given black voter you turn out to the polls is a vote in your pocket, and so they want to encourage that. The other thing, and this is especially true in North Carolina, is that the last couple years of efforts to reduce polling locations, to erect barriers to voting have been successful. There is a direct correlation between the reduction in polling areas in the North Carolina county and the level of early vote among African Americans. And so I think some of this conversation about enthusiasm is really better a conversation about the success of voter suppression measures over the past 2 years.
Mark, Donald Trump since the third debate, we heard him this week say to himself, "Stay on track, Donald."
That's what Mark says to himself every day before the show.
That's right.
Never works.
The reason that's amusing is because a lot of the people who have advised Donald Trump have said when he speaks on a teleprompter, he stays on message, doesn't get into these diversions. And we've now seen in the polls Republicans who are worried about him, his temperament, his judgment, are coming back home. So maybe the teleprompter, which he mocked so thoroughly, has been what's helping Donald Trump in the final case.
Maybe. I mean, I think there are a lot of other forces in play, especially over the last week. I mean, beginning with the FBI report or whatever, the Comey letter. I do think that, look, precedent has been very, very friendly to Donald Trump when he has had these relatively incident-free weeks, if you want to say that. I do think, though, that a lot of this is baked into the cake. I mean, I think precedent has been a very, very cruel mistress throughout this entire campaign, and I just think that any sort of, first of all, we've been proven wrong. I mean, the quote-unquote smart people around the table, and I've always thought that was overrated, and that's why I've never claimed to be smart, have been just wrong so many steps of the way. And I think Donald Trump would love nothing more than to just show that, look, every single bit of the playbook I have not only rewritten, but I have proven the old one wrong. And I think, yes, maybe he hasn't,
Right. Jamelle, on election night, what are you looking for, or on election day? What's one of the things you'll be looking for?
I'll be looking to see what Hispanic turnout is looking like in Nevada, in Florida, and North Carolina. Same with African American turnout. When the polls start closing, I'm really going to have my eye on North Carolina. I was just there for the past week, pretty much going in between Charlotte and Raleigh-Durham and Fayetteville, and that is a tightly contested state. And however it ends up on Tuesday, I think will tell us how the race is going to end up that night.
Right. Clinton's got to run up the vote in the cities and hope to hold it down in the rural areas for Trump. How about you, John?
I like to look to the East Coast, obviously, first. So I think Nevada's now basically...
Because you're an elitist? Or
well, no,
because
we get those results. We get those results
Time
earlier.
zones,
We get those
time
results
zones.
earlier. Places like Nevada, I think now, given the early vote, is probably gone for Donald Trump already. But African Americans in North Carolina, suburban Philadelphia suburbs turnout, like just raw numbers in Philadelphia, whether Clinton can run up the totals there, that will kind of lock down Pennsylvania if she does, and we look at those compared to 2012. Those are the earliest things, and I think actually keep an eye on New Hampshire, just because it's a state that had a pretty wide, in some cases, lead there. That race has clearly tightened up, and if Trump were to win New Hampshire, it obviously doesn't matter that much in terms of the raw number of electoral votes, but it might be an early warning sign for the Clinton campaign that all is not well in some other battlegrounds.
Right, because the voters in New Hampshire might be like voters on down the line,
Right.
even though they have 4 electoral votes. How about you on electoral?
One of the states that closes earliest is Indiana. That is a big Senate race. This is a state that Democrats originally thought was in the bag for them. It is tightened. They may even be a little bit behind. This is going to tell us whether or not necessarily if Democrats have enough to win a majority in the Senate, but it could definitely tell us if they will have a big majority. If the Democrat wins there, it's a sign that they're probably going to get a big number of seats that night.
And just quickly, Amy, explain when John says Nevada may already be done. I was in 2012. I was struck. The Obama people were basically Colorado. They
Yep.
before Election Day. How can a campaign know that it's done?
It's pretty much done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in Colorado, it is a mail-in state. Now, you can still show up at the polls, but about 90% of the vote comes in the mail. They know who their voters are in Colorado. They literally can tell you the number of people who have turned in their ballots, so they know in their modeling what that means for the kind of vote they're going to get. Same with a place like Nevada, where you're going to get 60-70% of the vote coming in before Election Day. And this is where Michigan, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, we have to watch on election night because they vote that day.
How about you, Mark? What are you looking for on election night?
Well, I mean, look, I think obviously East Coast states, because that's what we know. We don't have to wait around. It'd be nice to. I'm trying not to pay attention to exit polls like we do. I mean, there's been like a certain recent wave of people drawing conclusions between the hours of maybe 3 and 7 o'clock p.m. That's blocked off for a nap at this point. But yeah, we'll see. I think North Carolina, New Hampshire will be early indicator states, and also the time zone advantages.
And Jamelle, we don't want to look at the exit polls too early because they're sometimes wrong in the way they work,
exactly.
right? Quickly, Jamelle, whoever wins, there's going to be a huge chunk of the public that's going to be unhappy. Is that just the way it's going to be, or is there anything the victor can do right away on election night at all to begin the heal.
I'm unfortunately pessimistic here. I think that's just the way it's going to be. I think the tenor of this campaign, and specifically on the Trump effort, the constant invocations of rigging and the constant invocations of Clinton and the Clinton electorate being somewhat illegitimate, it's going to leave us with some fraction of people who are not just going to be upset, but they're going to be recalcitrant. And I don't know how that plays out.
All right. We're going to have to do theirs. Sorry, Amy.
It's okay.
Hopefully it'll all be cleaned up by the time we're here next week. Thanks to all of you. We'll be right back.